I'm like, okay.
I thought it was just, it
I
was
love that.
awesome. It was
I
absolutely
love that.
awesome. There was so much that was could be said, but I won't even get into it. But yep,
Yes, ma'am.
are live. We are live. We are
Real
live.
loud.
We are live. And I knew this, and we was just talking because this kind of goes along with what you and I are talking about today, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Listen, what's up, everybody out there in virtual land, YouTube, Facebook? This is the Ronnie and Yasheka's dating discussions, and welcome to our 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time live event through StreamYard onto YouTube and Facebook. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you are coming in for the first time, be sure to allow StreamYard access to you so that we can know who's making the comments, who's calling in from where, what. And if you're here, let us know you're here. Give us a thumbs up or make a comment. And no matter where you're doing it from, if you're on Facebook or YouTube, if you're on either one platform, make sure you subscribe to both stations. I am Yasheka Foster, affectionately known as the artist of dating, and I empower successful women to date with through self-discoveries with intentions to finding the love of their life. Breathe. And my handsome co-host.
Yes, good evening, Yashika, and good evening to all of those turning in, and of course, hashtag replay for those that are on the way home from work and want to get themselves settled in before they tune in. My name is Ronnie Walker. I am the master coach of exceptional dating, relationships, and sex, and I address and perfect the mindset of dating and relationships through a space of self development. And I welcome each and every one of you. And again, I still believe it's early enough in the month to wish everyone a very happy new year and welcome.
Absolutely. So I'm just trying to find us. I got to make sure all the everything is working. Y'all know how it is out here in Technoland. So listen, if you read my introduction to this particular segment, then you'll know how this came about. And just as I said, if you get two people in the same industries that get on a phone conversation, there's nothing that's off limits, especially when you have one of them being a man, one of them being a woman. Listen, we're not gonna talk about how he's a lot older than me. We're not gonna talk about that. But
I'm
I,
going to sit here and keep sipping.
I can safely say that I am a 70s baby and he is not. And I don't know what year, but he was in the 70s. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. So we're two different generations, right? We listened to, let's see, I don't even remember, like his playlist was like, I don't even know. I don't even know. Was it Ike before Tina or Ike with Tina? Which one was it when she was with her brothers and them? Like I don't remember. But anyway,
Oh well, see that's before me. So I don't. I can tell you that was before me. So yeah, you would have to talk to I have to talk to my mother about that.
generation that was. Cause see, I came in after Ike and Tina broke up. I think you was there when they were still Ike and Tina, somewhere along that line.
Well, I'm trying to think. Let's see. Hmm. No. Well, no. Actually, it wasn't.
I'm gonna have to Google that. We're gonna make
Yeah,
sure
you're gonna we can have to
we
Google
look
that.
that up later on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
See what Tina was doing in the 60s and 70s.
Well, see now, here's what you didn't have to do for reference for the people tuning in. You have to say, like, I am a boomer. I am a boomer.
Yeah, you are
I'm a
the
boomer.
baby boomer.
So
Yeah.
the boomers, well, like last year for the boomers were 64, if I'm not mistaken. I used to do a lot of this in terms of Gen X and Gen Y, whatever. However, it's funny because I remember having these discussions before in certain platforms with men and women, and the generation after us, we have a lot in common. There's a lot of intersectionality in that space. However, we all know, especially when it comes to women, how they all want to be 20 forever. But that's okay. That's okay. You all are the ones who invented the 50 is the new 30 and 40 is the new 20. And
No, we didn't
and
do
and,
that.
and us boomers are like, yeah, at least the men are like, yeah, okay, it is what it is.
And,
Just,
and, and I have to say that because this, and I was reaching because I got my little handy chart here. This on my desk.
Okay.
So when I am speaking to a certain generation, then I know who's who. You know what I mean?
Okay. Okay.
So I keep this little time chart. And so for those of you who don't know, the baby boomers were from 46 to 64.
Right.
And then 65 to 80 was Generation Xers. So my question for the people, Ronnie, are you a baby boomer?
Oh, I'm at the tail end of the baby boom.
Okay.
Yep. Hmm.
Okay, so there you have it.
That's why a lot of what I do intersects with the generation, because they'd be like, Moran, I says, yeah, okay, so then guess what part of the boomers I am? Because again, a lot of them are at the very tail end of the next, and I'm like, well, then there you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hear what you're saying. So.
My parents were baby boomers.
Okay. Exactly. And what's so funny? It's going to be real interesting as we talk about the generations after both of us, because this was that generation where the babies having babies. I mean, when I'm looking at 40-year-old grandmoms, I'm like, what?
Let me tell you, and I have kids in all generations. I have millennials, I have Generation Z's, and I have this new generation, a Generation Alpha. So I am all over the place. You understand what I'm saying? Like I told the ones who are the millennials, I'm gonna need y'all to really, really stay on the doggone Generation Alpha, because we're 40 years separated. You know what I mean? Like I have no idea what's gonna be going on in her life. But I need them that's in those middle tiers, those middle generations, to keep her on the straight and narrow. Because you figure by the time she gets to high school, I'll be legitimately drawing Social Security. Like legitimately, it won't be none of this fake stuff. I'll be legitimately just about drawing Social Security. Well, will I be like 58? Like shit, what is Social Security age? 62? Like
I think it's 65, but you can draw as early as 62.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
I'll be right there. Like that's why I gotta still keep it fresh and stuff. I'm gonna have to give me a doctor for some Botox, because I don't need them to be asking her, your grandma come to see you? I don't need that. I need them to say, oh, that's your mama. Okay, that's your mama. I need them to know that I'm her mom and not her grandmother. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, although they're going to say that, because they're going to say, you call her mama, then we got some explaining to do, and I don't want to have to explain it nobody. But that's that, though. That's that, though.
Women.
Me and Janet Jackson is picking up our kids. We got the same problem. She gonna really be drawing Social Security by the time 18.
And it's funny. Yeah, I know. And it's so strange, even because as I talk to the younger brothers, and the way they think that they're schooling me on the world of hip hop. I'm like, look, man, you're gonna tell me about hip hop, rap? I said, hip hop is older than you. I said, do you understand what this? So it's interesting how, they think, or I guess what they call the ageism, is when people automatically assume by the time that you are, a certain age, you're just too old to know certain things. And I'm like, no, sir. But then again, now what we're calling old is different,
So. And even you say that, and I remember, like, when you look at these social platforms, there'll be like a dance challenge where it might be 10 or 12 moves,
yeah,
15 or 30-second video clip, of a song, or excuse me, clip of a song. And, everybody will kind of like do this trend, whatever the trend is or whatever. I'm like, I remember having dance routines, like whole dance routines, because, we was into the break dancing and all that. So when your song came on, everybody jumped out on the floor, all you and your 5 girls, and y'all came out there and y'all started doing your little dance routine all into the song. You know what I mean? Like, we did that. Like, that was our song. So
exactly.
That was our time to practice it. We had the little cassette player. We'll rewind and be like, okay, Keisha, you missed that part. You missed that part, Keisha. Let's start over. From the top.
Now, see, you just referenced cassette players. So, but goes, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it. This is why when they try to tease the boomers, I'm like, nah, sweetheart. A lot of that stuff was in there too. I said, don't get it twisted. A lot of that same stuff. And what I love about the millennials, and I know this is, we're going kind of off the thing, but what I do love about the millennials, especially as I look at the various platforms, is that they're embracing so much when we
Yeah.
talk musically and things of this nature and the history of that. So as I listen to certain hip hop artists, be it J. Cole or I'm trying to think of the names, Kendrick Lamar, these brothers, well, they'll tell you they play homage to that. I'm listening to a lot of the younger guys now, listen to like the Wu Tang Clan.
Oh my God.
I'm listening to one brother from the Wu Tang Clan just yesterday on a podcast, and I'm looking at him, and he's got the gray beard. I'm looking at Scarface, all of these guys that were part of that later year. So it's interesting to see this, that where I look at more than anything, I look at the boomer generation and the generation after.
Hmm.
There was a lot of intersectionality in that because musically and the dance. So I mean, you just gave it away when you said cassette tapes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear some people talk about a song
Mm-hmm.
and they'll say something like, "Yeah, we took a sample of Lauryn Hill's Killing Me Softly." I'm like, "That wasn't Lauryn Hill. That was Roberta Flack." Like you off one, Roberta. Listen, Lauren, Roberta. It's like you off one, but they have no idea. They just think that that was
Mm-hmm.
the first artist. I'm like, no, she remade that from somebody else. Same thing with the Mary Janes and all. No, that
Exactly. Beyonce. They're like, oh, that song of Beyonce. I'm like, no, that's the Temptations. No, it's not. And then I
was
play it. Then they're like, oh,
way
wow.
back there, way,
Ex-
way back there. Listen, all that. So I be like, ooh, I am old. In my defense, I'm from Michigan, Detroit to be exact. So that's music, that's Motown.
well,
So
that's true.
I grew up
Absolutely.
on all kind of music. So I've been listening.
Absolutely.
I can tell you, I can sit here and I got about 10 blues songs that I know all the words to because my grandmother doggone listen to blues. And so I know my cousins and I, we could sit around and these old blues songs, we could sing along with them on the radio.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So so we definitely were a music family. Like I remember my uncle being a big fan of Prince and just I mean
That's
just
right.
that we were always and then of course that you was either Prince or you were Michael Jackson.
See, I was both. I love them both.
Michael Jackson.
I saw them both, and it's funny you mentioned. You're right because again, the contribution, especially in New York, between in me growing up, between what was coming out of Detroit and all of that, and then what was coming out of Philly.
Mhm.
We know it's a Philly sound, and
Yeah.
so much of that we're in between these places, and of course, New York had its own sound of things of this nature when we're
Yeah.
talking about music and what it did in terms of when we look at hip hop, and rap and things of this nature. So, yeah, I agree. I agree. It's just yeah.
But that I think all of that plays a part of how we got to be in so many different aspects. You know what I mean? And even in terms of life and relationships and things like that. Because even when I think about the baby boomer generation,
Mm-hmm.
you guys and granted you're on the end of the baby boomer and I'm in the beginning of my generation. You know what I mean? So we're
Mm-hmm.
not too
Mm-hmm.
we're apart but not that far apart.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And my mother's them generation, it was about okay, you got the girl pregnant, you marry her. Everything else came later. Love and all that stuff, all that came later. But
Right.
all
Right.
you do is that you had a responsibility and this is your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whereas then those people taught us that, well, go with your heart, because they tried to teach that to us. Go with your heart because, we're past the times where if a guy get a girl pregnant, we gotta marry her. You may not love him. Ain't nobody said you ain't necessarily gotta love him. Marry him. So we hear this. So for people in my generation, we didn't really know how to do one or the other because we only seen one or the other. We didn't know how to do both. You
Mm-hmm.
understand what I'm saying? Love on somebody, get married, then get pregnant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That wasn't taught for all those generations. So when it came to my generation, which was the turn of the generation when women stayed at home all the time to when women started to work, it started with that baby boom. So now they're looking at it like we don't have to be just stay at home moms. We can go out here and get degrees and get jobs, and we don't need to do this because we can marry who we love as opposed to because I'm pregnant with this child. right? So that was how they kind of like got started. You know what I mean? They were on the end of that, you get married, whatever, but they started raising up a little bit. And so because of that, my generation of people really got lost in how we need to be raised or how we need to love or date. And then so when you think about the generation after us, which is my son and my two bonus daughters generation, they're at the end of, or they're the beginning of trying to see those three generations come together. And then, or excuse me, those two generations, the baby boomers and generation X, my generation, come together. Now they're millennials. And oh, yeah, by the way, you need to learn what they did. And then also, you need to integrate this technology because this is the new turn of age. So they're looking at this and they're like, hold up, it's too much too fast. And that's why you have so many of that generation that's still at home with their parents because they're caught up in that. I want to do this because they instilled this in me, but I got this because they said that. And oh, yeah, about it strong. And oh, yeah, I got to learn technology, but nobody taught me. Oh, shit. So a lot of them take forever to leave the nest. And then you got the generation that came after that generation, which is your generation alpha. They had already seen the doggone generation prior, which was the generation X, and say, well, you know what? Y'all had too many restrictions. Y'all either had to marry somebody because you was pregnant, you had to date whoever. Then I saw my mother and them saying, well, we can date and have a marriage, but then marriages start getting divorced. Y'all said we got to date this person. They came up, and then y'all confused because y'all don't know if y'all Generation X's or if y'all millennials, because all y'all know is all this shit is too fast for you. And then here come us. We're like, you know what? Just be free. Date who you want to date. Do what you want to do. It don't matter because we got everything on our side.
Right.
Technology. We got, the ability to love who we want to like. So they just stay and forget it and just do whatever feels good to them. And I think that's the generations in 4 generations, that 4 or 5 generations. That's what it happened. And so you have so many of us that are in my generation and then carrying over from your generation that's trying to figure it out because we got one foot here where we want to continue with our values and our morals, but we want this newer generation to be just free to do whatever without living through restrictions, but yet still bring some of those old morals and beliefs with you. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why so many of us at this age group are going through changes that are just really, really like midlife changes that are amazing. That's why you see so many like different voices now, and so many there's so many people we're having, I believe, more conversations than what we had. Let's just say 5 years ago or 6 years ago between a man and a woman. Because we're realizing that so much has changed because everybody was raised in these same households. You have the men and the woman raised in these same households, not as siblings, but you're being raised by a mother that was in the middle of those generations. And I'm a boy. Then over there's that girl that's being raised across the street by the mother with the same situation. So neither one of us really know how to manage this thing called life because we're stuck right here, because we don't know how. So that's when I say when we also now we're all older now. We're all going into our 50s or our mid 50s or whatever, and we're like, oh shit, we still want what the baby boomers had, which was dying old with somebody, right? But we want to do it more modernized. So how do we do that? And that's why it's so many of our generations of people who are divorced, but yet are releasing some of those things that were taught to us, so that because we know that no matter what happens, we all want it to look like it did in the baby boomers.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't want to take that path to get there. We want to take more of an optional choice for us.
That's a lot. That's a lot. It's funny. I love the way you put this. And see, if for anything else, take away our credentials. If a lot of you listen to just our life experience and our interpretation of those life experiences, you can learn a lot. See, I came up in the space where it was marry before you carry. See, I came up in a time when, and when I say came up, I'm talking even before I knew, I mean, just being young, just looking at relationships or marriages on a whole. So it was the dating. And see, okay, let me just backtrack. A lot of what's going on is we tend to think, we think in terms of such extremes. You'll have people who think 20 years ago is 100 years ago. And it really isn't. This is why when I have to remind, the generation after me, I says, no, it really wasn't that long ago. I said, you're not, we're not as far removed as you want us to be, and you're still not as modern as you think you are because you look at the generation after you. So I came up in a space where having a child outside of wedlock was a scandal. That wasn't allowed. Now, did it happen? Of course, it happened throughout the history of man and women. Those things do happen. Because, again, if you look at marriage and you look at adultery or infidelity, again, it is said that, marriage envies the longevity of infidelity because it's always been there. It's always been there because for a lot of times, marriage was arranged. A lot of marriage was arranged. It wasn't about love. It was about carrying forth a legacy, joining families to maintain power, all of this. So this concept of love and marriage was something that one would arguably say happened in the 50s or, the 60s or 70s. But then again, don't forget what you mentioned when we talk about what was happening. We had a number of things that happened, especially if we're going to talk about the black community. We had civil rights and we had feminism. Now, today, we all can debate whether we're in third wave feminism, fourth wave feminism, but it evolved. And some would argue for the worst, because we understand fundamentally what feminism meant, but it's now taken this place where it has women taking career over family, whereas before it was about family and carrying forth that legacy. So now we're also putting, and also too, birth control. Because remember, the whole purpose of it was procreation. Sex years ago was looked at something that you can do in terms of hookup culture. Now again, did it happen? Of course we know it happened. And one would debate on to what level it did happen. But today we have the internet. And when you talk about technology, we now have phone sex, video sex, pornography on levels or whatever. Things that you used to be able to sneak and hide to go see is, again, I came up as a New Yorker, native New Yorker, where 42nd Street, Times Square, was the epicenter of any and everything concerning the sex trade. So you can walk down 42nd Street. I'll never forget this, Yasheka. We as young boys used to go down to Manhattan, 42nd Street, because that's where all the karate movies were. So the kung fu movies, and that's where they were. You didn't see too many, if any, movie theaters in the hood. That just wasn't an option. So then you would go there, and in the summertime, you remember Donna Summer?
Yeah.
Okay, what was one of her biggest hits? Bad Girls, Is it Bad Girls? Yeah. I mean, that whole thing was, and I'm all that night. I remember, exactly. Yeah. And so you look at that. I remember walking down the streets in the summertime in 42nd Street, and prostitutes, boldly walking, breasts hanging out, short pants, you name it, super high heels, the things that they call stripper shoes now, whatever this is nothing new. And this is what gets me when I tell the younger generation, I'm like, stop thinking that you all invented this stuff. I'm like, do your history. This is nothing new. So all of this non-committal and things of that nature, back in the 70s, it was called free love. Mm-hmm. The hippie. Nothing is new under the sun. So again, if you really look into the history of relationships, platonic or otherwise, a lot of this stuff is just the same thing coming full circle. But it played a part, as you said, in how we have the conversation of relationships. And what I see, and again, this is just Ronnie Walker's observation and my interpretation, it's just like we swung the pendulum so far to either the left or right. And it needs to come back somewhere to the center. Because if I went back to the experience of me growing up where you had a man meeting the father, say, listen, I like Yasheka, Yasheka likes me, I want our hand in marriage. Dad either approved or disapproved of that. Now, again, that was something that I remember doing once or twice, but I was on the tail end of that. That was something as a young boy I saw. You know, women that, that did that. Dad picked and made sure, well, you got a job? Really, how you going to provide a family? What happens if by chance you get her pregnant doing something you know damn well you ain't supposed to do? How are you going to take care of her and that child? He had to have a damn game plan. Period. End of story. Because it was his little girl. Because once her ass left that house, she was out that house. Right. And it was sink or swim. So man had to have, that young boy had to have a plan. So when he said 10 o'clock, he damn sure meant 10 o'clock or dad was coming out there searching. And so there were those things that there was an order. So you got married, then you have the baby. Now you have those, and again, feminists played a part in this, where you was all about getting your career, being like the men, and then somewhere in there, after all that's done, you have a child. But it's okay if you don't have it within the wedlock, because you're a superwoman. You can afford that child on your own, and things of this nature. And then somewhere in there, you can find a man to marry you. Or hopefully that man that you had a child without a wedlock married you. And so, again, we can have the discussion of where all of that went left. And so now we're here in a situation, especially in the black community, where they say 1 in 4 black women are getting married. So what went wrong? Why are the numbers so low as opposed to others? And this is where we have this conversation where I says, listen, ladies, they all want to blame the men. And then the men want to blame all the women. And I'm saying there is some responsibility in both. So if I'm talking to the women.
But is it really though? Is it really? And what I mean by that is, and I'm going to interject here, is it really anybody's fault? Because if I think about me being raised in the 70s.
Okay.
I was born in 73, so it wasn't until 83 that I was 10. So I grew up more so in the late 80s, early 90s. Okay. Came from, there wasn't a whole bunch of choices that men can go and do. So they went to the streets in order to make ends meet, because see, they still had that mentality that I still got to provide. I don't have a skill. Nobody's going to hire me to doggone pay me what I need to be paid. So now here I am, got to go out here and hustle. So I say that because to say this. So 1 in 4 women are being married. It's not because we're not married, marriage material. A lot of our men were incarcerated. They didn't know how to get out here and do what needs to be done because they were living in 2 different generations. Get money, take care of family, and whatever. So when we say whether or not it's a man or woman fault, when you look at it and everybody really sit back and look, is it, or was it an economical fault? Was it something that happened in our economics that had an effect on how we raised? Because at the end of the day, I mean, if you read the Lynch letter and shit like that, I mean, it talks about all that in there, to say that this is what happened. So it's not nobody's fault. And that's the thing that I think in our community need to really, really start understanding. It's not one or other person's fault when it comes to man or woman. It was the system. So now we don't let the system beat us. We join hands now, and then we still push forward because, see, we got the tools. And what they gave us is more than they ever thought they would. And so now, not only do we know we can make money and be successful, we can all do this without us having to worry about somebody giving it to us because we can go and make it on our own. So when you think about it, it's not anybody's fault. We were just a product of a system that we're still trying to recover from. And if we both genders understand that, we will be so much further along as a race, as a community, as a whatever. Some people got it, some people don't, but it's more of us that do not have it than do have it.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm not going to take away from the incarceration argument. But is that the only and the main reason? No. I think far too many men and women rely solely on that. There are other things at play, and I believe we really have to dive into that deeper. But again, even if you look at, because we're talking about systems, remember, even before then, we had Jim Crow. If you look at our people, if we're going to talk about black people, you look at our marriage rates way back then, we still married at very high numbers. We're talking during the days of Jim Crow and a lot of that. So it wasn't just the incarceration rate. It just wasn't. Now, I'm not saying, again, I'll be the first to tell you there's a system at play here. And I will even argue to this day, there's still a system at play here. And I've always said, especially when we're talking about racism, I've always said, listen, the days of thinking that it was as overt back then, I said, racism in and of itself, when we're talking about the justice system, hell, we're still looking at news where a gentleman, a black man who's been incarcerated 30, 40 years, who's just not getting out for something he didn't do. The DA knows it. He didn't do it. And of course, I don't think we talk enough about the women that's wrongly incarcerated, because a lot of women paid a huge price for their families. And I don't think that's spoken about enough. And I really would love to cover that at some point, because that affected families as well. So we do know, I'll be the first to tell you, that was huge, because the racism in itself is very, very insidious. So when you talk about incarceration, we can talk about the rate that are hired, when there's studies that will show that before they will hire a black man, that they will hire a black woman first, because they don't want to compete against men, because men compete in those levels. So they would hire a whole bunch of women to keep from hiring men, black men. And that put men at a disadvantage. So I hear what you're saying. I'm just saying that's just a small part of that. And I'm just one of those who just don't only want to rely on that as one of the reasons why we're having the challenges that we're having. And I've always made the point that we have a lot of unlearning to do, because there's some things that both as black men and black women, we've been told from people who don't have our best interests at heart, that keep us at odds. And you and I spoke about that a number of times. So this is why, again, if I may pat ourselves on the back, why we need this platform, and not just a guy speaking and saying it just from a man's point and the woman saying from a woman's point. I think we both need them to come together and go back and forth and share their thoughts and ideas, and of course share the numbers and reports based on that. So no, I agree with you to a point, but I will not say that is the only part, or in fact maybe the biggest part, to say that that's why we have the situations we have in terms of the marriage rates and relationships. So that is just my thought on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would never sit here and say that, one thing is the responsibility of something just going bad.
Right. I don't.
The Berlin Wall wasn't the result of one person.
Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So when I look at it from that perspective, of course I know that it takes onus. You still have to be responsible for yourself. But what I really wanted to just make sure that people understand is that if we know this, if we know that there's a part in there that is nobody's fault, and then there's a part of there's his fault, and part of that is our fault as women. If we know that, so let's just say that we take that whole pie and divide it into 3 equal pieces. That's 33.33 and a third, right?
Mm-hmm.
If everybody takes the same amount of because you already know the middle piece, which is the government or the system. They're not going to do
Right.
wrongdoing. So let's just take my 33.33 and a third and your 33.33 and a third. We're equally wrong in this.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, we start from zero, meaning that if we know this, that means they cancel each other out. So let's just do what we need to do so that we can put our 66.66% together and fight against this 33.33% together, because together we are a bigger number than that number, right?
Listen, I've always, yeah, you said something again, but here's a challenge, Yasheka. The cleanliness of theory is no match for the messiness of reality. And by that, I hear what you're saying. As a matter of fact, one would argue this is what Malcolm X was saying, Minister Farrakhan was saying. There's a lot of this that, again, but here's what happens within the 33 and a third percent with the men. If you ask them across the board, what percentage of this is the government, then you're going to get a different number from the women and their 33 and a third percent of what percentage of the women. So we have to all agree at some point, because what you're saying would work if everybody was just very binary and it's just, hey, we all agree that the government plays this percentage and no bigger. But what tends to happen is that because of free thinking, because and here's the other thing, some women and some men benefit from said status quo. And power. People don't like to relinquish power unless, as they say, inspiration or desperation. Mm-hmm. And so there are a number of dynamics in play here. And then even outside of the government, we still have our friends, we have families. And again, there are those other places who they may not be, and then with the relationship score, but there are those women who want you to believe that it's all about the sisterhood when really it's about the numbers. They can give a rat's ass about black women all overall, just like there are those spaces of men that really they could care less about the evolution and growth of black men. Right. They just want to sell you the dream. And so here we are thinking that we don't need women for this because, again, and so this is why, again, we have this whole space where everybody's running each other, because we have to be honest about where we stand and what we believe. But whether or not we agree or disagree on the percentage of quantifying the part the government plays, I will again say, yeah, racism plays a part. The government plays a part in that. But again, especially when it comes to, and I will say as a black man, that they really want to keep the black man at a space of a disadvantage. Now, with that being said, even with that, I still don't want to sound as though I'm making an excuse, because when you think about it, as a black man and looking at my ancestors, we've been dealing with a lot worse. So if you want to talk about coming out of slavery, fighting Jim Crow, we have the wherewithal to do that. And this is what I keep trying to say to our men and women. Look, I don't care how bad you think it is today. Our ancestors had it worse, and we got past that. And I say, why? Because what that black man understood, he's only going to go so far without that black woman, and that black woman understood she's only going to go so far without that. So we knew that we were all we had. And so whatever minor issues we may have against, that may separate us, for the greater good, we need to work together. Yeah. And so that, I'm going to stand on that, and this is just what I'm going to continue to move forward. So in finding where, when you talk about, or when I mention whether or not you want to listen to me, Yasheka, I truly believe with you or I, you're going to get the results that you need, because if just our life experience, this is what I love about the boomer generation, whatever, because we are at that crux of what a lot of that changed happened in the way we view ourselves as men, the way women view themselves as women, and relationships. And I think it's somewhere along in there we can pinpoint, or I would dare say even the generation before the boomers, where you can pinpoint where things start to fracture. Yeah. And if we can be honest about it, then we can get there. But for me, I've always stood by the marry before you carry. I believe in the grand design. I believe in the creator. I think there was an order. And so now where we're in the space where everyone wants to say, there are no rules, there's too many rules. I'm like,
No,
no.
but you know what? As let me tell you something, Ronnie. And maybe I can say this now because life turned out okay for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I was one of those women who been married twice, and
Mm-hmm.
I was with both of my husbands for about 3 years or so before I even got pregnant with our child. I think the first one, we had been married for three. We had been married about 3 years, and then I got pregnant with our child, and I had our child in year 4 of our marriage. And then the second husband, um, we were married for 2 years before I got pregnant with our son, and then had our son. So I say that to say this: if I had never had my kids, I don't know if I would have waited on me to get married first, because looking at it now, although I did it that way, it still doesn't guarantee anything, but I feel like as a woman, yes, I want, to have certain values and all this and that and the third, but sometimes life is not that black and white. And so me being a woman, and I can speak from that because I've experienced it, being married twice before I had my babies, or before I even got pregnant with my sons, and it still didn't go the way I planned. So should I have not been a mother because of that part of life? Because if there's two things in this world, I mean, granted, we're more than just wives and mothers, but for the reason that we were put on earth is to be that, right? The rib and the barrier, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if I'm supposed to fulfill those two things, and one is should be indicative of the other, but that ain't the way it always is. I don't see. Maybe I can say that because it turned out good for me, meaning that I never struggled as a single. When I became divorced, I never had to go through the trials and tribulations that I've seen so many other women go through, to include my mom. She married my father, prior to me being born, but that was the extent of it. He sent many money, as long as he could, but then that was it. You know what I mean? So, and she was married to him. You understand what I'm saying? And it didn't work out for her either. So what I'm saying to you is, I just couldn't imagine having to make that choice. And I think that that's the part of these newer generations, that they're saying that, listen, we should be able to enjoy this one shot at life no matter what. And if these are the pleasures in life for some people, not everybody, but for some, because this is the way we were intended, right? To punish the earth. But if this is not necessarily the goal of everybody, then, should I have not done one because I didn't get the other? And that's just something to think about. Like, everybody's going to have their own perception,
Right.
especially depending on what. But
Well, again, that all depends on, well, listen, we, and I'm just going to speak about people, we as a people are very religious. Now, we can talk about religion, and we're not talking about religion just for the sake of someone trying to find something wrong with religion. But what I do believe, like I said, when I speak of the grand design, so let's just say, I think what tends to happen, even before I get to that point, I am a product of a two-parent household in the hood in Harlem. I'm talking the days when anybody who can tell you Harlem anywhere in the boomer generation beginning to end. Even we could talk about the Renaissance of Harlem and the things that over that. But we all know that time in Harlem when it was just on the decline. Heroin was a drug of choice. Cocaine was really a rich white woman's drug. But everything that was there. So I grew up around a number of single-parent households. Now, there were some fathers who were single parents, but majority were women. And yes, I can tell you of the fathers who were there, who were drug addicts. I can tell you some of them who were, I would some call I guess, an anomaly. I mean, me and my brothers, we grew up in a father who had a union job, ex-military, and he worked his way up and got a job. And from there, with my mother, who maintained the household, again, as we know, very traditional. My dad came home, food was fixed, we did homework and all of that. I seen, and again, this is part of where I started really looking at the study. So if you look at the study, so we can talk about our anecdotal situation, but then if you look at the studies where a man or woman has a much better chance growing up in a two-parent household as opposed to a single-parent household. Now, does that mean if you grew up in a single-parent household, you're doomed? No, we all know of those stories. We know of those stories where we can be the athletes or entertainers who had that situation. I don't think enough is shared about the two-parent households. And again, now we're talking about the media and the narrative, where you will find, so we'll see this person made it without the need of a father at home. She could do it on her own. And I think they're doing women an injustice in those spaces. Give them credit, give them their flowers. But again, the studies will show a healthy husband, a healthy wife will raise healthy children. And unfortunately, sometimes, the only times that we saw that, at least me growing up, you saw that in the space of everybody being white. Leave it to Beaver. We can go the Brady Bunch, even when they had a blended family. There was no shortage of positive images of families together again. But with us, there wasn't the case. That's why when the Cosby Show came out, even the black people was like, that shit's not realistic. A doctor and attorney, and we're like, yeah, of course it's realistic. It happens. So I don't think there was enough showcase where you had a healthy black family raising. Again, that doesn't mean a single parent household. You didn't have children who excelled and did wonderful things. But overall, when you look at the studies, it was both a male and female. So when I speak to the younger men and women about this, thinking that, Ronnie, that's way back then, that's all traditional, outdated, I'm like, no, it's not. I said, no, it's not. It's not outdated. Again, if you don't want to believe me, then go look at the studies. Do your own research.
I don't think people are necessarily saying, and it's just what
I hear that a lot.
I don't think people are necessarily saying it's outdated. What people are saying when I hear that is that on the receiving end of that, if I come from that generation or that's what I've seen, then I'm going to always be chasing perfection because I think I know what perfection looked like because I saw it in my household. It looked like they were happy. Do we really know if they were happy? And I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about who had kids on two sides of town. So was they really happy? You know what I'm saying? And then on top of that, the other part of that is the person on the receiving end, you're always chasing that. So you'll mess around here and live your whole life and not know what it's like to just really, this thing called love, because you're looking for a certain perfection that's not existence. So I don't think they're really saying it's outdated. What they're saying is that we come to a conclusion that the shit isn't real because they were living in too many secrets. You had this uncle or this cousin doing something to this person, like all those damn secrets that was being kept. So that's why we're not looking and saying, okay, was it that perfect? Okay, let's redefine this shit because we thought it was perfect, but there was some things going on there too.
All right. Well, again, I hear what you're saying, but I think part of the challenge, and again, this is where we're going back to the government and the media, where it's painting this picture, because I said, well, the first challenge is you're chasing perfection. It doesn't exist. There wasn't a narrative of showcasing that, yeah, the healthy man and woman doesn't mean that they wasn't arguing. That doesn't mean that, they didn't showcase enough of the ups and downs of a relationship because we all know that they're there. I don't care if the Reverend, the pastor, there was still argument. There were still challenges. There was still growth. And with that growth comes changes and discussions and things of this nature. There wasn't enough of those discussions happening. Everything was painted as that, which is why people so many people ended up um, chasing something that doesn't exist, and that is perfection. When no one was there to tell them that what you're saying here isn't what it is in real life. And let's face it, some of the loudest voices are coming from people who really didn't have a very healthy upbringing, and so this is also, so now what you have, and I've always said this, especially in the social media, it seems like sometimes some of the most, I hate to use the word, toxic people are having loudest voices. But I do believe, and I still believe, that marriage is a very important part in the growth of a relationship. Not perfection, but something that, again, because we're always growing, hopefully, you know, but again, far too many of us um, are chasing something that doesn't exist. And so when the disappointment comes, we take it so personal that the last thing you've got these now generations want to do is seek marriage. I mean, the studies also show that men and women, millennials, are taking longer to get married.
Yeah.
They even taking longer to have children because they're fearful of putting them in this age of uncertainty because
Right.
so many things that are going on. So even when we talk about something like genders, I'm sitting here reading now. Someone has said that there's over 164 different genders. And I'm like, oh, when did this happen? Then there are there's just so many things, that's the chaos that's going on. And so again, I revert back to, again, not trying to impose my way, the way into what I'm just saying. Okay, if I had to really take a spectrum of what was working, what more than likely to work, as opposed to it could work, but the odds may be working against them. I looked at a man who's done his work on himself, a woman that's done some work on herself, and realized we ain't gonna get it right all the time, but this is what we gonna do. We ain't gonna, the first times of trouble, I'm filing for divorce or I'm stepping out the door and getting it on with my work wife or husband. We're gonna sit down, we're gonna lock the door, and we're gonna talk this out, or we're gonna go seek some counseling, things that, again, they didn't have too much back then, especially when it comes to our people. We had to suck it up. If you listen, I mean, this is what it was. Like I said, we were all we had. They had access to all these people. Remember, we wasn't allowed to go to school to learn to become marriage therapists and counselors. Again, they didn't think that we had the mental capacity.
Yeah.
And yet I would argue that our marriage rates and longevity lasted longer than a lot of them. Because there were things that we had to worry about. Hell, we were fighting on just how to be treated as equals. So when I listen to people talk about this free love and all of this stuff, a lot of stuff didn't apply to us. A lot of hippie generation. We provided the music during that time, but hell, we were still trying to vote. So there are so many things, that, again, we have to dissect that. Again, it doesn't go for us again. So that's just my part. And again, I we've gone quite a bit, but this is something that we can dive into for deeper, because again, it's a conversation, Yasheka, I still believe we need to have. And I really have challenges with men and women, especially our youth, that want to give up so easily. Because as much as they want to sometimes crap on the older generation, I'm like, no, we paid a huge price. We went through a lot for you to be here and to have first world problems and complain of stuff that, what? Are you kidding me? That's a problem to you? I'm like, man, I said to these young guys, I said, stop, I'm like, no. Let me tell you what it's like. This is when you had to hear the story of, when I was your age, I had to walk through 20 miles of snow again, because that was really I'm like, I said, so it's amazing as what young men and women, and sometimes look at problems now. I'm like, is that a problem? Really?
Yeah.
Why is that a problem?
I do that to my kids too when they have here in this area, if they predict snow. If they predict it, so it may be snow, we don't know how much, we don't know what's the chances of rain. If it's going to be ice, they close the schools down. Whereas that I literally remember walking to school and having to lift my legs up in order to walk in the snow.
Oh yeah. Oh,
You know what I'm saying? So literally, it was right there, and all I could think about is, I know my mama saw that news. You know what I'm saying? Like being an adult now, she know that their schools was closed, but she figured I'm gonna still get these jokers. I'm send them on their way. That give me about 30 minutes before they
right.
get back. You know what I'm saying? She was
Right.
telling me one day. She said I didn't watch no news. I was like, so when I tell my kids stuff like that, that is the truth. That is the truth. Like there was no such thing in those. And this was when in the 80s, in the 90s, like yeah, between you figure between 5 and 10. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Right.
So that was the well no I'm sorry, the 70s and the 80s, so that was between 5 and 10. But so for the most part, I mean, I literally remember those things, but now I mean so much is different with just everything that we do. So when you listen to your parents or when you listen to what they say, it's almost as if you don't know what part to bring with you and what part to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I believe my son's generation, they're kind of like they don't know how to they don't know how to be out there on their own. You know what I mean? That's why I said before so many of them are still at home, is because we was trying to figure it out what to give them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We started giving them so much to they didn't know hard work no more. They didn't know that you got to think for yourselves and problem solve.
That's right.
I remember one time my son got a flat tire on his car. He called me, and I didn't understand that to save my life. He was about 17. He might know. I take that back. I think he was already a freshman in college. So he was about 19 or 20. He called me. And I said, well, why you didn't call the insurance company or call a friend? What you call me for? Because you got a flat tire. And I'm like, you got something in your hands that I didn't have, which is the ability to Google it. Even if you didn't know how to change it, you can Google it. When I got a flat tire, I had to hope I could figure it out or hope somebody flashed down to help me or something like that. But I sure couldn't call my mama.
What about the women standing by the car and lifting the leg of the skirt, trying to get the men to stop? Listen, and these are things again when I talk about the history. See, as men, and again, I came up where at a certain age you went and learned how to fish put a worm on your hook if you're going fishing, whereas early on, dad did that for you. Now, mom made the food that you went out there on the boat and went out there. Again, I came up in those times. And see, to me, there was a structure and order. And here's the thing. When I hear women talk about, try to paint this narrative of the woman being less than, and they don't want, again, this is all part of the whole feminist movement. See, the men that I grew up around, they didn't look at the woman as less than. It was just the role she played and he played. Again, I remember coming home. There were parents that I knew where he brought the check home and put it in her hand, and she took care of the household, and money for him to go do whatever, if it was a bowling league or whatever the case may be. But that house ran. The lights never turned out. There was always food in the fridge, warm meals again. So when I listen to these people saying, "Oh, that's less than," and women were above, I'm like, well. To me, I grew up where there was honor in that. Women were honored in that space, and men were honored. Now we have where, again, so as young men, we learned how to fish, we learned how to hunt, we saw dad fix on the car, and guess who dad called to help him fix the car? So we knew the sockets. We knew how to change oil. We knew how to change a tire. I remember, and again, as if it was yesterday. And when I think about it, I said it really wasn't that long ago. There's a book that I read some time back called Helicopter Kids, and it refers to what you were speaking of, where so many of us, and not just in the black family, across different cultures, that have come here in the Western world, and we want to give our kids things that we didn't have. And what we inadvertently did is not prepare them for the real world out there. And I'm very firm when it comes to the young men, because these are the same ones that want to talk about leading and this is what I'm like, no, bro, you don't have your ish together here. You want to talk, who are you leading?
I think what all that comes stem from is men and women becoming greedy. Not so much greedy to the point where we felt like we had to have it. It's just that we wanted certain things. We felt like we deserved certain things. And so that meant in order for us to achieve those things, both people had to work. Because see, we knew that the amount of effort that we put into it was going to be half of, or excuse me, although we was going to put in double the effort, we wasn't going to get the same prize as other people. So we knew that if their check was, let's just say for easy numbers, $100,000, and they were able to live in a high-rise apartment, then I already know as this person going into this culture that they're not going to give me $100,000 stuff. They're going to give me $50,000. But since they're going to pay us only half of what they paid y'all, but we want to still live like them, we got to work. Both of us got to work. You go get your 50, I go get my 50, so we can still live like them. And so once we did that, we started giving our kids what we saw the kids got, because that was a better life. We want that better life. So we all started doing things to get that better life. It wasn't so much about the, what a man can afford to take care of a household, because back, nowadays, in order for us to even live and pay a mortgage and get some food, both people got to work no matter what, because of the cost of living. So I get that. I get that, it was easier for the woman to stay at home. I get that. It was easier for her to do whatever. But there was a part of us that also knew that we could keep doing it that way, but we're going to always stay at this level. And we wanted just a little bit more. And for us to get a little bit more, it meant that we had to go out there and aggressively do it. And it's just the result of a cycle. That's it. And we're still trying to, repair our people from all that. You know what I mean? And so yeah, it had been perfect for me to be at home and be a stay-at-home mom. Absolutely. Now that I'm in my 40, I'll be 49 in March, so I'm heading to my 50s. I feel like I'm kind of tired. You know what I mean? I feel like I am kind of tired. You know why? Because not only was I doing the woman things and the mama things, but I was still working. And I had to do all this because I knew that for my kids and my family to have more, we both had to work. But now that I'm older and my kids are older, I'm damn tired now trying to do all of it. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's just some shit I don't want to do no more. Like, I don't care what's going on. I don't want to do it, period. So that's, and I think it just really started from everybody wanting a little bit more. And it's not that bad to want more, but we have sacrificed a lot to get a little bit more.
I would agree. I would agree. I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and I won't go into that. But no, you're right. I mean, there are some things that we, in our efforts to keep up with the Joneses, and let's face it, the consumerism, the materialism that played into a lot of that, just for ourselves, not just in terms of our kids, that led us down a road that now, hell, you have many. And even for the years, when I sold insurance or showing people when I did a lot of my financial coaching, of just seeing the directions that a lot of men and women went down. And it amazed me how people can agree to marry and agree on ABC, but on this part, when we talk about money, they're so diametrically opposed. And I'm like, wow, how did you not have these conversations again? So a lot of it, as you were saying earlier, is a trial by fire sometimes.
Yeah.
Which tends to lead to the divorce and the argument of things of this nature. Because, and again, where there are those arguments, and I believe rightfully so, the challenges with the school system. Mm-hmm. They didn't teach, how many years I remember when they're like, well, why don't you teach the young how to open a checking account? Mm-hmm. Save a percentage of the money that they make from their part-time job. I remember going to my dad and uncle about asking to borrow some money. I'm like, what? Borrow? No. You see that lawnmower out there? You see all these houses? I said, I'll give you the first tank of gas, and you're going to knock on these doors, you're going to set a price, and you're going to make that money. I don't care whether you shine shoes, I don't care what you're doing, but what you're not going to do at this age is ask for money from another grown man or woman. And that was, again, those things. Now dad and mom is out here, here's $100. And then, again, so these are those things where we now are above working at McDonald's or things of this nature. Yeah.
My mother and her siblings, she's the only one that was truly a single parent where nobody gave her anything. And my brother and I, looking back, we had paper routes because we.
You see, that was another thing. Yes.
And if you ask my cousins, none of my cousins had paper routes. I think one of my cousins went and got a paper route because he seen my brother doing it, and so he was like, "Well, let me do it for a little while." And him and my brother was like, "Well, you can go right on with me." That was it, just one cousin. But other than that, nobody else got paper routes. So what I say when I say that is, that's why my brother and I are the way we are now. Very, very driven. You know what I mean? And I think we are literally a product of a mother that we knew that she couldn't give us certain things, but we wanted it. We had cousins that had Nike gym shoes. We were still wearing Payless specials, my brother and I. You understand what I'm saying? So we wanted that. So we was just like, listen, we got to get it. So mom can't get it. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to go ahead and, you know what I'm saying, we're going to figure this thing out. I remember my brother wasn't even old enough to doggone drive, and he had a job. He was so young that, of course, he couldn't be on payroll. The guy actually paid him up under the table to come and sweep his doggone parking lot up in the evening time. You know what I'm saying? I had to fake a birth certificate when I was young enough to get a job. Somebody gave me a blank birth certificate to fill in the blanks to say out loud. That's why if you look at some of my paperwork, it'll say I was born in 72 instead of 73 because I got documents saying that I was born in 72 because I submitted a birth certificate and I was born in 72 because I wanted this doggone job. You understand what I'm saying? So it's one of those things where, so yeah, those kids don't know about that. So my brother and I both, we wanted our kids to have just a little bit more. And because of that, he and I have been, he went one way, I went the other way. He did it his way, doing entrepreneurship and all that. He owned businesses, before I even thought about a business being owned. But I went the traditional way. I said, well, let me get education. Mama can't pay for education, so let me get it this way. You know what I mean? I already knew that I didn't have options. I could have probably got financial, and went to college. But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if I get financial aid and they pay for my college, I still got to eat. I still got to do whatever. Who going to pay for that? Mama can't pay for that. She can't even send me $20 a week. You know what I mean? So let me go somewhere that's going to pay for everything. So that's why as soon as I got able to, I left and went to the military.
Okay.
Because of what we just knew that we wanted to do. And so these kids, yes, with our kids, we didn't set them up like that because we didn't want them to have to work that hard.
Right.
But we wanted them to have options. I didn't want my kids to be, well, I got to go to the military because mama don't have the money. I want my sons to say, well, I'm going to go to the military, but after I finish my degree, then that way I can go in as enlisted or I can go in as an officer where I'll make double the amount of pay. You understand what I'm saying? I wanted them to make choices. So that's, anyway, Ronnie, love these candidates better so than anything else. What do you think?
I love it. And I hope, matter of fact, I don't even hope. I know the people tuning in are getting a lot of value out of this because, again, it just shows you that we can relate to what you are dealing with. So when I say you're going to go to datingdiscussions.com and you look at a background of Yasheka and I, yeah, that's all fine and good as well. But here you get to hear us in real time in our experiences. So, again, we bring a lot to the table. We bring a lot to you. We have a lot of value. So if this sounds like a shameless plug, it is what it is. But I'm just telling you that I love these discussions because, again, it lets people know that we're not just some structured, celebrated and credentialed robots, and that we do have something to offer because we do have life experience in this space that you can learn from.
They do like to ask that question.
Yeah. Yes.
And I have to remind people, I am a dating coach. Dating coach. But even if I was a marriage coach, that's fine too, because I know what needs to happen in the marriage and what don't need to happen.
Yeah. Well, again, and being at the tail end of the boomers, I cover a number of the generation. So again, with that being the case, I'm always saying, look, again, I get it, and I have to sometimes remind myself that I am speaking to different generations. So when I speak to that, it's like, okay, I don't want you to think that I've forgotten what you're thinking about or what you're having to deal with, which is why I stay so in line with what's going on online. So I don't care if it's Instagram. I'm looking at a lot of TikTok, and as much as there is so much crazy stuff that you need to throw away, there's a lot of good information, and there is a lot that is shared by the younger generation that I get it. I said, listen, I get it. So again, don't think that Yasheka and I are so far removed from what you're dealing with to know that we can't help it, but we definitely can. So no, I appreciate you again, Yasheka, for these conversations, because they're definitely needed.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you. And again, if you guys are tuning in live, make sure you let us know that you were here. Coming back on the replay, #replay, so we can know that you stopped by. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Ronnie and Yasheka's Dating Discussions. And while you're there, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe.
And there you go.
See you guys in the next segment. Good night, Ronnie.
Good night, Yasheka. Take care. Good night, everybody.